Community Development and Transportation Committee meeting for July 24th, 2019. The purpose of committee meetings are for the city departments to pass along information to the city council and discuss initiatives listed on the published agenda. By ordinance, the committee consists of the mayor, members of the city council, and the city administrator. The ordinance mandates the city administrator as the chair of the committee meetings. By ordinance, the committee makes no formal decisions on committee matters. Rather, items are voted to move to a mayor and council meeting for consideration and vote, or staff receives guidance from the committee regarding a matter. This is a public meeting, but not a public hearing. Therefore, while the meeting is open to the public, we do not take public comments or questions during the committee meetings. Public comments or questions are received at the regular council meetings held at 7 p.m. in the city council chambers on the second and fourth Monday of each month. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the Community Development and Transportation Committee meeting for June 26, 2019. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Judy. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by the mayor. Any discussion or questions? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Moving on to community development. Number 2, consideration of approval to adopt a historic district master plan from TSW Design. Ms. Wakefield.
Good morning. So our consultant TSW is here. This is Caleb Brassico with TSW. He's going to present the master plan that we've been working on since last summer with the committee. And I want to make you aware, first of all, that this is the plan. Once we get approval for you to move it onto a council agenda for adoption, this is adoption of the plan only. What comes after this is the regulations. So what we're hoping to do is we'd like to bring the regulations to you at committee in August so you can start taking a look at those to move that forward. But the plan has to be adopted before the regulations will be adopted. Okay?
Great. Thank you. Good morning.
Real quick, so plan comes and then the rules out of the plan then have to be adopted into ordinance and basically added to the UDC?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Great. Well, good morning. As Jackie mentioned, my name is Caleb Rossico with TSW. And as you know, we've been working with the stakeholders of the historic district and really the larger Roswell community for about a year now to have a conversation about preparing a historic preservation-focused master plan for the entirety of the historic district that did a couple of things. The first thing we were asked to do as part of the process was to think about how do we balance growth and preservation in this area. So it has always been implicit on not sort of preserving the historic district in amber, but rather coming up with a balanced growth strategy that will ensure a vibrant, sustainable, and thriving downtown, but in a way that does protect the historic resources. And then from that, as Ms. DeBell mentioned, the idea of the master plan is to inform, sorry, Jackie, to inform changes to the UDC that would codify the vision, and of course, with a strong preservation and commitment to preserving the identity. So what we did was we worked with the community for several months now in a process that began with a review of the historic patterns and existing conditions in the historic district. We reviewed all your previous plans. We conducted stakeholder interviews. We had some really great walking tours where we actually had several hundred folks from Roswell walk around Mimosa and Canton and various streets in the study area on a Saturday and a Sunday. We then embarked on a process with the community to understand the vision for the area. From that, we then developed began to develop the draft master plan, where we did concept studies of specific sites. We prepared charts and graphics showing potential scenarios, and then began to move towards how those would relate to what the current regulations allow. We had a series of meetings with that, one of the most important being a community charrette, where we were here in this room and the council chambers for several days actually drawing, and the public could come in and look at what we were doing and opine on the ideas. And then from that, a series of advisory committee meetings and open houses. And then only from that had we then had the opportunity to actually put together the document. And as I'm sure you've heard from staff, this was a drawn-out process. We had a very engaged stakeholder committee that really were wonderful champions of the effort. They read every word in this report, and we had conversations about many terms and ideas that had various iterations before getting to the point where we are today, which is really to present the draft of the deliverables and presentation for your consideration. So in terms of recommendations, the bulk of the process is about changes to historic preservation and land use. But as with any planning effort, additional ideas did come out that we wanted to put in the city's record for consideration in other areas, for example, transportation and parks and open space. So in terms of preservation, the big idea, and the idea that we probably spent about half our time talking about, is that there is a desire to keep the preservation regulations, but to modify them in a way that is more character area based. You may remember that Roswell is really different from a lot of historic districts in that you have various settlement areas built at various times. You have mill areas, you have sort of the Canton Street crossroads area, you have houses on Mimosa. And so what we very quickly figured in our analysis, and was reinforced by the steering committee, was that there was no one-size-fits-all to historic preservation or the regulation of new development in the historic district. And so we referred back to these character areas that were in previous master plan studies for the historic district, and have decided to use that as the basis for the regulations. And the other thing that's critical to understand about the character areas is that they allow the plan to have different sort of levels of preservation in different character areas. Everyone knows that Canton and Mimosa are probably your most intact historic districts, historic sub-areas, and so because of that, they have a different set of regulations than, for example, State Route 9, which I think had a handful of resources north of City Hall and then a few more to the south. And so this approach allows us to have various regulations within there. The other thing that we had a lot of conversation about was, in addition to this idea of character areas, what are we really regulating? And again, based on a lot of back and forth with the community, the idea that came out was that we would require compatibility with the historic patterns, but we would require that at the front of the property, the portion of the property that you can see from the street, because that really defines the character of the various Roswell historic character areas. And so we created a term in this document called the protected view zone, which effectively is the portion of any lot, any development lot, that is the required front setback and a 40-foot building. So if you think about a property, if there happens to be a house on the property, it's the front yard of the house, and then it's 40 feet into the building. So it's really the portion of the property that you see from the street. And again, we had a huge amount of conversation about this. We had proposed ideas that would have looked at the entire lot. We proposed ideas that would have been more conservative than this. And finally, after a lot of back and forth, it was agreed on that focusing on that protected view, again, what you see, what you experience, what is the character-defining feature of the historic district, would be the area where the changes in the master plan would focus. So, from that, we developed a very rich, complicated, but thorough set of strategies for how to apply all of that to the various character areas in Roswell. What this particular diagram shows, what this particular chart shows, on the left are the various character areas. And they are graded, they are shaded in terms of the amount of historic resources and the amount of preservation approach in these draft regulations. So the areas that are the darkest, Bullock, Mill Village, Mimosa, Central Atlanta Alpharetta, those areas have the most historic resources today. When you look at the number of officially designated historic buildings, it's very high. And so because of that, those dark blue areas have the most rigid historic protection strategy proposed. So for example, buildings would have to be of a building type already found in that area, so you can't build a building that looks like a mill in the middle of Canton Street, because every building there, for the most part, on the north side looks like a house. Your style would be per the current guidelines that the Historic Preservation Committee enforces. And then the the protected view zone, the area where you really focus on the greatest level of protection, is demarcated differently for different properties, because as you know, the setbacks really do vary. The other thing that's really critical about the dark blue areas is that they would be restricted in that protected view zone to 2 stories in height, noted in the fourth column. This is an area, again, where we probably had 2 to 3 meetings just to talk about this existing issue. When you look at the UDC today, UDC typically says 3 stories is appropriate in those areas. And after a lot of back and forth with the committee and the community, determined that the sort of balanced recommendation would be to limit buildings to 2 stories in the front, if you happen to have a vacant lot that doesn't have a building on it. And then in the rear, beyond that protected view zone, so again, 40 to 50 to 60 feet into the property, there would be no change from what the UDC requires. And then, so we did that for all of the various areas. So the areas in dark blue have the greatest protections. The areas in lighter blue have fewer protection, and the areas in white at the bottom, which happens to be a couple of areas that are technically in the historic district but really aren't historic, they have no additional protections beyond what is done today. So a couple of things that I wanted to also point out is that in addition to a general conversation about building height, there was a lot of conversation about building height on State Route 9. And so what was agreed upon here, and State Route 9 is sort of South Atlanta here and or North Alpharetta here. State Route 9 is broken into effectively 2 sub-districts, actually 3 when you think about the area right around the mill. The northern one, which is at the bottom, has a fairly low level of protection, because really the only thing in there are, a couple of old homes on the west side of the highway. In this area, the proposed strategy would say that if a building is going to be very large, meaning over 80 feet in length, it would have to be broken up into either a series of smaller building facades, meaning it looks like a collection of smaller buildings. But if it isn't, if it was a 300-foot-long facade, for example, a monolithic grocery store or a monolithic office building, the height would be reduced to 2 stories. So on State Route 9, north of here, the agreed sort of strategy for this document was that if a building facade, which again can technically be more than one building under fire code, but if the facade, what you see from the street, is more than 80 feet in length, it's limited to 2 stories in that protected view zone. But if you break it up to look like smaller buildings, to have indentations between those sections, it's just per the UDC with a minor 10-foot setback above the 2nd story. So this provision here is something we talked a lot about, and then a similar strategy is recommended for south of the square, south of 120 in the entry area. Now the other thing that's on here that I wanted to point out that we had a lot of conversation about was how do we regulate things like setbacks? Because as you know today, if you pick up the UDC and you look at the downtown districts, the code gives you about 4 or 5 flavors of setbacks, depending on what you're building, depending on what sort of zoning district you're in. The committee felt, and we felt, that was really inconsistent with all of those diverse character areas in Roswell. And so what we did was to prepare a graphic, what we're calling the regulating plan, that would actually preemptively define what setbacks can be on every single property in the historic district. And we did that based on looking at the historic resources on either side, making sure that we match those historic resources, and in those areas with fewer resources, like State Route 9, a shallower setback. So this diagram has a lot in it, but we've also spent about 2 to 3 meetings going through the detail on it. So I wanted to let you know it was not arbitrary. And then here indicates what I was talking about on State Route 9, where you would be able to build as currently entitled under the UDC, but if you had a large building, more than 80 feet in length, that wasn't articulated into smaller buildings, you'd have to have a step back above the 2nd story. And this is similar to what's actually proposed at Hill and State Route 9 now, where there's a similar step back idea. And so additionally, I mentioned the regulating plan. And this is, again, another one of those documents that is incredibly rich. Again, we spent a lot of time with the stakeholders talking about this. And as I mentioned, it sort of preemptively maps the setbacks. But the other thing in here that came out of this process was that the historic character of Roswell is not only about the buildings. It's also about the landscape. It's also about the entrance to the city from the river. And so when you look at the regulating plan and you look at the area near the river, you will notice the regulating plan actually does not establish a building setback. Rather, what it does in this area is establish a mandatory 40-foot wooded setback on both sides of the road, so that long-term, if any of those apartments ever redevelop or any of those multifamily buildings ever redevelop, they will not be required to pull the building to the street as they would be today, but rather they would actually have to preserve that 40-foot wooded setback, which every single person we talked to, and we received a lot of positive feedback on this, felt that preserving that entry into the city was really, really important, especially with some of the roadway changes occurring, that making sure that new development continues that was critical. And so from that, as Jackie mentioned, there is an idea that we would then, we came up with sort of a basic idea of how these changes could in the future be incorporated into the UDC. But one thing that also came out of the process was that the Historic Preservation Committee members felt that even with more flexible standards, there could continue to be an opportunity where there needed to be a deviation from those standards granted based on some sort of design criteria. And so when you read the master plan, you'll note that there's also concept about creating an option for alternative compliance. And basically what this would do is it would say that if any of these regulations related to, for example, building height or setback or something else in this document, when the regulations within it or when the ideas in it are incorporated into the UDC, if something can't be met, but there is a compelling design and preservation interest in not meeting that regulation, the HPC would be able to grant alternative standards to that. Effectively, it's similar to a variance, but it's not really a variance because it's not about hardship. It really is about the preservation of the historic resource. So, for example, if you have a tree that is important, or if you have a strangely situated historic building, and this approach would, again, be purely based on the design of the structure, and it would be based on how well the structure conforms to the intent of the preservation ordinance, how well the structure conforms to the historic preservation standards and the guidelines, and very importantly, how it performs to the comprehensive plan and the master plan district. So again, this would be recommended for inclusion in the UDC as a way to give the HPC authority to grant exceptions to design for exceptional cases of historic preservation.
And I want to make a comment right here. The Design Review Board currently has something similar to this in our current code, where if they have something that comes in, when a project comes in, we have something called what standards can be modified. So during that process, and there's 8 different things that we can modify that's minimal, but while they're in the DRB process, based on this, if they meet the criteria, then we can modify some things. It's very minimal, but this will be very similar to that. So that was discussed at length during the committee meetings, and we let them know that DRB had something similar, so they wanted to see if they had something that they could do, and it all is tied to design.
Yeah, and this really came up in the context of building height. You can imagine a lot of feelings on building height, especially on State Route 9. Some folks actually wanted to limit it to 1 story. Other folks did not, and so it was agreed upon that by setting, we mentioned a 2-story cap, and then if you have narrower buildings, you could go up to the current UDC provision. Some of the committee members, many of the committee members felt that, well, maybe there could be a 200-foot long building that really did sort of excel at design and excel at historic preservation that we might want to approve based on design criteria. So this would also create a mechanism for that. But everyone felt that just allowing that without having some sort of more rigorous process would be of concern. So this was, I think, a great idea that came out of the committee.
One other thing, so when we're working on the regulations, which I'm currently working on, which they drafted already, TSW did a draft, and I'm currently going through those. One thing we'll have for you will be like the criteria and things related to that alternative design, okay?
And also the regulating plan is part of that ordinance
Great.
approval.
Okay, so in addition, second historic preservation, and that is really the bulk of historic preservation recommendations. But the second one is to continue to use the guidelines. We feel, as your consultant, that your guidelines are very well written. I know there was a lot of dialogue about that at the committee meetings, but they are a very powerful tool for the Historic Preservation Committee and are very clear in terms of what they require and what they give guidance to the HPC to do. Additionally, though, we did have a lot of dialogue, really in some ways extending beyond this process, about what constitutes a historic building in Roswell. And so for the purpose of this exercise, for the purpose of the regulating plan, we used the official city map of historic resources. We worked very closely with Julie and understood what all of those resources are. But it was pointed out some of those resources have been lost. And so we do recommend that as the city moves forward, there is an update to that historic resources map, because so much of the changes that would go in the UDC do refer back to that, really want the most accurate data. So that process is important. So with that said, we wanted to show some examples very briefly of what these changes would allow or would not allow. So something like this, which you all know, would no longer be allowed under the proposed rules. In terms of building architectural design compatibility, you have a gabled roof building and a flat roof building, which are incompatible. You have lack of compatibility with materials and architectural standards. And so we worked very closely with Julie and Jackie and Alice to understand how the regulations would or would not allow this, and really tried to put in place provisions so that something like this could not happen. And I believe this was actually under the pre-UDC code.
Yes.
So this is an old one, but a lot of public concern about this building. The other building that would absolutely not be allowed in the location it is obviously Vickers. Vickers is what I would call a shop front or a Main Street type building on really what is a block of houses. They're all historic homes. And so by using the proposed strategy, that site would have had to feel more like a house. It would have had to have matched the house in terms of architecture, in terms of building size, in terms of material. So based on looking at compatibility around it, something like this would only be allowed in areas like South Canton, where you already have that brick Main Street feel, or in the more commercial State Route 9, but not in an area like Canton Street or like Mimosa, where really every single building is what we call a house building type. Additionally, there's a recommendation to continue to restrict building materials found in the historic district, subject to HPC review. Again, a lot of this is already in your code. Require the design of compatible front yards. And what we mean here is that the regulating plan establishes some setbacks that are deeper in some areas, shallower in the other. Want to just reinforce that if every other house on the property has a landscape front yard, you can't use your front yard for parking. And that already is in the UDC today, but it was just important to the committee members. And then finally, also a general policy recommendation. We don't know how the city will move forward with this, but to just recognize and think about trees in the front yard as part of the sort of experience of the historic district where that's prevailing. Additionally, we worked with the city on coming up with some standards for context-sensitive streetlight fixtures, both in terms of the fixture and the bulb. And I understand that the city is actively working on making this a reality. We had a little bit of conversation about signage. Generally speaking, encouraging the use of public art, public signage that tells Roswell's history, and signage and structures that make folks aware of the historic district throughout. In terms of land use, very high-level recommendations for continuing to promote a balanced mix of commercial uses, not just restaurants, but the community obviously is very interested in office, very interested in a grocery store, very interested in true retail. In terms of housing, a lot of conversation occurred on housing, and even though the city cannot require developers to build a certain type of housing, there was a desire to not just keep encouraging townhomes, to think about aging in place, and then to actually amend the UDC to allow cottage courts. And if you're familiar with the UDC today, cottage court is a small building type that really is a collection of detached homes around an open space. And what's interesting is that your current UDC in downtown allows townhomes all over the place. But you can't actually build a more historically compatible cottage court. And so the idea here is that in those areas that allow townhouses, why don't we allow a less dense cottage court that's actually more compatible with the historic district as well? So that would be a change in the UDC recommendations.
And that has already been started, and it's been through Planning Commission, and you'll see the first reading in August.
There were also some policies about encouraging green buildings. Again, more of an aspiration than a requirement, but we wanted to put that in there based on some of the public feedback. And then, as I mentioned, we also got a couple of recommendations related to parks and transportation. In terms of parks, a lot of interest in continually improving lighting in the parks, to think about if green energy can be incorporated into the park and sort of green standards to sort of reflect that. In transportation, we worked with Rob and developed some very conceptual transportation recommendations to improve intersections, to make them safer to cross, safer to access the historic district, including Atlanta Street at Marietta Highway, which really is a major linkage between sort of the Canton Street core and Mimosa Street. Improved facilities around the town square, and then continuing to think about connection between this building and Canton Street, State Route 9, to encourage use of the parking. We also incorporated a policy recommendation about continuing to think about expanding the trail network in the area, to add new sidewalks in a couple of locations where they're needed, Atlanta Street, and then between Canton and South Atlanta. We also looked at improvements on Green Street, which is probably, quite honestly, where significant growth in the historic district could occur because there are fewer historic resources in that area. So sidewalks and paths between Canton Street and Green. And then recommendations for mid-block crossings, recommendations to think about traffic calming on Mimosa, potential need for traffic calming on Canton, most likely the north end. And then as redevelopment occurs in the State Route 9 area, think about additional streets and connectivity. So that is an overview of what has come out of the process. As we've mentioned, a lot of these recommendations have gone through various iterations with the public, with the stakeholder committee, but I think all in all, we were actually very surprised and pleased with the amount of agreement that we were able to get to come to the point where we are today. So I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Floor is open.
So first of all, I want to thank Caleb, thank Jackie and Alice and the staff, and also the members of the committee who spent huge amounts of time doing this. It's a little hard to understand when you just see it in paper, so I'm glad to have walked through it. You know, I had a few goals when this started personally, and that was, one of them was to provide certainty to residents and landowners with specifics, in that all the different areas of the historic district were not the same, and trying to apply the same rules to the different places was causing a lot of issues. And so I'm really pleased to see how thorough this is. You know, I've had a couple of questions that were asked of me and questions I've asked that were more emotionally based. And when I go to the document and say, okay, what does it say? The data settles me pretty much right down. And I think that's really the most important part of this is to get us to where it's data driven. We know what will happen. Somebody who owns a property knows. Somebody who lives next door knows. Those are all important things to me. And I think so far from what I've been able to understand of it, I think it does that. And I think for me the biggest thing is our historic district didn't develop at the same time. It developed over a long time, and it'll continue over a long time. And you see that in each of the character areas, right? That they developed different times. And even inside some of them, there's some different times. This does a really nice job, I think, of recognizing that. I often think of what happened in the 1800s when Great Oaks was built, right? If you looked up and down the street, all those homes were made of the same material, and all of a sudden somebody built this great big brick thing. Right? Today, to us, it's historic, and we want to do everything we can to save it and its grounds. This does a lot of that same kind of stuff, and so as you get into the details, and I'd encourage everyone to do that, pick a piece of property that you're concerned with, put your finger into the place where it is, and see if it settles your concerns. That was the surprise that I had as I started to get into the detail of it. So again, thank you all and the committee and the hundreds of citizens that participated. for everything you've done to help us clear up and make more certainty in the area.
Again, I'll echo all the thank yous around everybody, the committee, and all the citizens that took time to do this. You know, when we came into office a little over a year and a half ago, I looked at this and said, this is the number one problem that we see in the city as far as divisiveness and division, and why are we, you know, what's a main source of argument? So pushing this forward to get a historic district master plan to kind of set forward what is it? And from the very beginning, I said, whatever the citizen committee and staff and the consultant came up with, I'm going to support. And if the building fits within that historic district master plan, or the project fits within that historic district master plan, I support it. If it doesn't, I won't. And, you know, I think that's very important. We had from talking to staff and others, we had a committee of a lot of different ideas and people and this, that, and the other, a lot of different of where we're going. But as Roswell as a whole, we need to, what's built there, now let's take this historic district master plan, get it through quickly, get it codified, and let's move on. Let's take this as our guide. Let's do what we're going to do moving forward. And if it fits a historic district master plan, it fits a historic district master plan. Let's go. You know, because this is where we've got hung up a lot. And I'm glad we now have a tool that we can go to, and it's black and white. And we say this. You know, I agree with you on the HPC oversight. I think that's a pretty good idea when it comes to different things. That's a body that this is what they do, and you know, I'm not a historic preservationist, so I don't know what it looks like from their point of view when they're going through all the regulations and this, that, and the other. So that is very exciting to me. This is an exciting project. I support it 100% moving forward, and I hope this allows us to kind of let's go as a city forward into the future and start working on things we need to work on. Thank you.
I also thank you for all the hard work and hours for all the hours that has gone into this. It really shows, and I think it'll be a wonderful plan going forward. It's an initiative I'm really proud to have been involved in from the beginning, so excited about it. I did have a couple of questions. You mentioned the alternative compliance that the HBC can grant. At what point in the zoning process does that happen? I mean, is that a part of any recommendations if it has to come to council, or can it happen at any point along the way?
So what we're looking at is, since it's design-based, when a plan comes in to go to the HPC. So let's think it's not a rezoning or conditional use, it'll go straight to HPC. And maybe there's, you know, a tree, or maybe there's something else on the property, and if we can get them to work around, or there's something in here that says, okay, you got to do this, but there's something they want to save, or there's a different type of design, and the HBC wants to use that, we would do it at that point in time. It would be through that process. If there's a conditional use that goes through the historic district and comes to you, it probably wouldn't be at that time, because you don't see the design of the structure. So this is tied to design more than, think, regular regulations. It would be all related to how the property lays out and everything else, depending on what's on the property.
Now, the one thing that we did have a discussion about was that, and we said it a couple of times, is that, I mean, when you go through a zoning, the approval's really with mayor and council.
Right.
And if mayor and council approve, when you approve use in the zoning, HBC can't, you know, that can't be overruled. But we wanted to give them a little flexibility on the design, so that they would feel at least that, and the community would feel that the HPC was charged with protecting the historic resources and making sure that infill development is compatible, would have a little of that flexibility. But there are certain things that it is, you know, like the zoning, conditional use, that it would be definitely what mayor and council decides.
So what I think we're trying to get us right now in our process for Design Review Board and HPC, they have this option. If a conditional use comes through or rezone comes through, before it goes to Planning Commission, one of the stops is DRB and HPC, depending on where it is in the city. So they get the time then to discuss the project, give their comments. And sometimes we get comments that say, you need to move this, or you should do this, or you do that. And then those comments are brought forward to the Planning Commission and to council.
Okay.
So, and during the process, the applicant has the option, and sometimes they do this, they revise their plans based on comments they received from the commission, one of the boards, and sometimes from the neighbors at the neighborhood meeting. So we get revised plans before PC, so they've already changed from the time we got them originally. So they have that time right now, and that'll still stay in the code where that process will stay in there. But this gives them a little bit more flexibility, more so to tweak a few things here and there, maybe after, or also a project that doesn't have to go to you, where they get some design and there's just something there that is blocking or changing, or this just gives them a little bit different. And we're going to work on that, and we're going to work with legal as to how to write the alternative compliance portion.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to confirm that they had the authority to do that and that it was incorporated in any plans or recommendations for rezoning.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
okay. That's all for now. I'm gonna have some questions.
One real quick question. How long, this process took almost a year, huh?
Well,
Yes,
we can't
Cost
Yeah,
you
you gotta
a whole
You gotta
dinner.
do the cake.
Cost you a dinner.
I had to bake a cake.
make cake.
So I challenge us as mayor and council. This took a year of a lot of hard work to not take this and try to tear it apart, insert things into it, put this, that, the other, and push different ideas into this project. That we had a citizen committee, we had a study that was done by a very capable consultant, and I think we need to take this and move forward without gutting this and playing politics with it. So I encourage us to take it and move forward with this as soon as possible.
So, well, thank you and congratulations to everybody who was involved in the design of this historic district master plan. I would like to focus right now on the character areas that were designed. And perfect. So, and from there, I want to focus my attention in two particular areas, which is the South Alpharetta Atlanta Street and the North Alpharetta Atlanta Street. There might be some undeveloped sites or empty sites. So what was the discussion during this, the putting together this master plan about what to do with this? What kind of character are we going to give to this area moving forward? We know there's many cities who all of a sudden from one day to another, they become historic cities with brand new buildings that because the architecture they use and the materials that they use, they make it look like they've been sitting for 100 years or so. So my concern is on these two particular areas where today might not be a clear historic look and feel, might be empty sites. How is going to look this in the future? What do we want it to look into the future, and what kind of character we want to develop in these two particular areas? So I don't know what was the discussion, if you can.
There has been a lot. If you look in the document, the appendix, right at the end, actually has alternative scenarios that were done for several properties in that area. We actually focused on that area because we knew that was the greatest opportunity for change. And quite frankly, there were competing ideas thrown out. Some of the concepts that we did, particularly for the south, showed buildings pulled right up to the street, like the two-story brick building that just went off. I think it's a dentist office. Is that correct? And folks generally did not feel that was appropriate in that location. And so the recommendation that was come up for in that area was that the architecture and the standards would be pretty flexible. So you can do, when you look at those provisions, building type is per the UDC, which is exactly as it is today. Building style is per the existing guidelines, exactly as it is today. The width of the building would be limited to 200 feet, which is a very large, which is a city block, a small city block. But that area has very few changes from today, the same for the north. But what would be the unifying characteristic in the south is the landscaping. After talking with the community, talking with the steering committee, who we have several members in the audience today, everyone agreed that what defines that area is the front yard and the trees and the landscaping. So when you look at the regulating plan, you'll notice that there is a variable setback. You're not going to have buildings built right to the back of the sidewalk. And so the trees, the landscaping, the front yard, that over time is going to be the unifying character. It's not going to be the architecture. It's not going to be that every building has to look like a clapboard white house, because it won't. It could be a mill building typology, or it could be a more of a commercial typology. But what is going to define State Route 9 is that setback and is that landscaping. So that's why that district, again, South Alpharetta and North Alpharetta are the lightest color. They have the lightest touch. So generally speaking, no changes from today, except for 2 stories right on the street, unless if you're a wide building, and then north of it, if you do a taller building, you have to make the building narrower in the north, unless you go through this very alternative compliance process.
Okay, so nothing defined in terms of architecture
No,
and,
no.
and materials.
Nope.
We wouldn't want to necessarily do that, because we don't want to put anything in a code that says that every building in this section of has to be a Frank Lloyd Wright design. And that's why you have a design review board. That's where you have the guidelines, the historic guidelines, which basically lays out the flavor of the homes. And I don't think we want every structure to be cookie cutter, but to be compatible with the area, and something that the Historic Preservation Commission will look at and determine. I mean, the design guidelines are very clear about the flavor of the style of architecture.
So you mentioned that mainly the South Alpharetta will be, the landscape will determine the character of. What about the North Alpharetta?
Well, they would
The
also
same
front
thing?
yard landscaping, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, with that one caveat of right where 120 comes in, where you do have the buildings pulled right to the street, that would have to continue to have that pattern. So technically that's State Route 9, but that's also technically a different character area, a very regulated character area, because it has 83% historic resources.
Right. Thank you so much.
And that's one of the more interesting columns to me, is that second column. It really helps me to understand the differences in those character areas, the percentages and the actual numbers. That's very helpful.
And that was actually a recommendation of one of your committee members to put that in, so, and she's in the audience, so.
And I'm sure Jackie, you want to thank the committee.
Yes.
Because often we deal with committees that start out, they're like 15, and by the end, we're only dealing with 3. They were very involved, they were very
We had all of them.
vocal. Sometimes for us, they were a little bit frustrating. But they worked through all of those, all of the issues. There was, everyone got to have their say and have their input, and I believe we came up with, or at least I should say the committee came up with a very good document.
I would like to thank you all for the hard work that you've done. And, it's amazing that throughout this process for the last year, I haven't heard any negative comments. I know that the steering committee has been very involved. It's been an inclusive process, which I thank you all for that. But also, I would like to thank you, Caleb, because you were navigating some difficult waters. And you did a great job with it because you managed to bring together people that are polar opposite in their thinking for one common goal. So I do appreciate that very much, and thank you for being at the helm of this project. I would also like to encourage council to move this forward. And I personally cannot see a single thing to pick this apart. So I would support us moving this along at a rapid pace. We've lost a lot of time, so let's make up for that.
Well, it's on, we're putting it on the August 12th agenda.
If they allow us.
Do they have to?
Gary,
If
do you
we
need a
move
mo-
it out
do
of
you need a-
committee.
do you need a motion from us?
All right, fine. We'll take a vote.
Is that a motion, Mayor?
Did you make a motion?
Second, Gary.
Mayor, was that your motion?
Yes.
Motion to move forward by Mayor Henry, seconded by Councilmember Judy. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Thanks, Caleb.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Caleb. You're the best. I owe you dinner.
Yeah. That was pretty good. Shows you've got a great plan when staff is moving it forward.
Without council?
Moving on to transportation, item number 3, discussion of proposed costs for aesthetics for 3 bridges over GA 400, the Big Creek Parkway Bridge, the New Holcomb Bridge Road Bridge, and the Southern Express Lane Bridge. Mr. Del Ross.
Good morning, everyone. Item number 3 is a follow-up from last month. If you remember, we brought to you an item discussing aesthetics on 3 bridges over 400, specifically the 2 bridges included in GDOT's 400 Managed Lanes project. For a little bit for a background, the city has been working on the local T-Splosh Big Creek Parkway since 2014. GDOT engaged with us and actively started moving forward on 400 around 2017, 2018. We've been looking at ways to add aesthetics to GDOT's scope and wanted to see what you thought about aesthetics on Holcomb Bridge and aesthetics on the Southern Express Lane Bridge. The guidance we received last month was to take the approved Big Creek aesthetics, and we'll show you that in a second, and to show you what the cost of applying those Big Creek aesthetics would be to the new Holcomb Bridge and the new Southern Express Lane Bridge. To show you first what the aesthetics will look like as a refresh, top left picture is what it would look like from overhead, looking across 400. That's our new bridge. You see the brick aesthetic work and the wide sidewalk, along with some landscaping in between the sidewalks and the travel lanes. The bottom right picture is more of an overhead view showing you what it would look like from 400. If we were to apply that same look to GDOT's 2 bridges in their contract, those costs would be roughly $5 million for Holcomb Bridge and roughly $3 million for GDOT's Southern Connection south of Holcomb Bridge. This is not an urgent issue, but it is a little bit time sensitive. We have been asked by the state to provide specifications and tell the state what our intention is by the end of the year, so we've got 3 or 4 months to play with this. If we are on the right track and we still need small tweaks, that's perfectly fine for us to accomplish in the next 4 months. But if the guidance is for us to start from scratch and take a fresh look at that, we need to get underway with that very quickly because we don't have a lot of time to get back to the state DOT.
I certainly like them having some aesthetics to them, Rob. I think my challenge would be to say, what does the value engineering version of it look like? You know, is there more than one? You know, how can we build up the cost? $10.5 million seems like a big number. Don't know, you know, if you feel the same way. Is there a step-up version that, you know, accomplishes all the goals?
2 points to that. First is think about that 10.5 million number more as 8, because the Big Creek cost has always been embedded as part of our budget for Big Creek. So we're not asking you to thinking about an additional 10, we're thinking about asking for an additional 8. Second, in the past several months, staff has been looking at other examples of what cities and counties have been doing for bridges in the metro area, and some of these you may be familiar with, some of you may not. A lot of cities and counties recently have not been spending, and I'll show you a picture in a second, have not been spending the level of funding that, say, Alpharetta done on Encore Parkway. Alpharetta, in partnership with the CID, kicked in approximately an additional $5 million just on the aesthetics of that bridge. If you don't mind, I'm going to show you some pictures here now that we have prepared to show you what other cities and counties are doing on a less expensive scale, and primarily just looking at fencing options and lighting options on top of a traditional GDOT bridge. So, you're all familiar with Encore Parkway, Alpharetta. Aesthetics, about $5 million on top of what we would build for a standard bridge. These next two are on 85. One is Jimmy Carter, the new DDI over 85, and one is up in Swanee. The Jimmy Carter version, that kind of triangular looking fence structure with the lighting, adding it on the bridge, was about $1.5 million for the bridge. And if we looked at what a standard looking bridge was with just some fencing, similar to what we have on Holcomb Bridge there right now, with maybe a branded Roswell looking decorative fence, that would probably be, Lawrenceville's was $278,000. We could probably do something under, say, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 if we were just looking at a fence attached to GDOT's bridge, per bridge. Two other bridges you may be familiar with, 75, the skip span connector that's up near Kennesaw State. They did it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but I'm going to put my cursor on the screen to point out that. This bridge is near Kennesaw State, and the architects and the engineers on there decided to incorporate two mountains into the look of the bridge. So looking at it from the interstate, you actually see two mountain structures to kind of symbolize Kennesaw Mountain in the area. They also did some lighting that you can see here, along with a more decorative fence than you would typically see on a GDOT bridge. Total on this was about $750,000, with another $250,000 for the lighting component. The last one you're probably familiar with, this is the new DDI over near the Braves Stadium on Windy Hill Road at 75. Total for this, including lighting, it's hard to see in this picture, but there is a decorative fence, a silver fence, a pretty modern looking structure across the bridge here, along with some arch lighting. Total cost for that was approximately $1 million. That was more of a retrofit on top of a fence, and a lighting retrofit on top of a typical bridge, versus completely changing the bridge and putting some form liner and changing the actual look of the bridge itself, as you can see in these pictures.
So, great, thank you. Yeah, this kind of summarize, my conversation with staff a couple of weeks ago, and where I was asking, my first priority is operational and functionality of the bridge. My second priority is aesthetics, how much money you put. Once you have operational and functionality investment, then what do we need to put for aesthetic? And this is when I start asking which other bridges like Jimmy Carter and 85 and these other examples that they're bringing today, how much do they cost? How much money they have to put on top of operational and functionality for aesthetic. And I'm so glad that staff today was able to present options, just to put in perspective, what kind of aesthetic we can put the money on, or how much money we need to put to make us happy from the aesthetic point of view, which aesthetic start becoming more subjective. So you have to kind of imagine like a curve between cost and how much happiness will bring you this aesthetic. So I think that here we have some great examples of how to invest less money in aesthetic, but still be something that looks good. Might not be an iconic bridge like Golden Bridge or the bridge between Savannah and South Carolina, but that's fine. But the thing is, if you put a lot of money, better be an iconic bridge. If not, just get something that is acceptable, nice looking, but doesn't cost too much taxpayers' money. So these examples are great to put in perspective that, and thank you, staff, for giving the options and putting numbers and finding out how much does it cost, the aesthetic of these examples.
So I think this is like going to a car dealership. You've got your car, and do you have the backup video? Do you have the this, the that, the other? For me, I think it all boils down to what do we have in the budget after we get the project done, or what are we looking at, and then what can we do? And I think it's important. So I think it's important to have a uniform look over the three bridges. For the first time in the history of Roswell, we'll have three bridges over 400. A lot of people, this is the gateway to the city also, and they're going to come in and look. So the best product we can put forward within the budget that we've set, I think we need to do. Obviously, we don't. It's hard to say what that budget is based upon all the moving parts, but this is good food for thought here on the different options, and what can we upgrade to, or what do we need to downgrade to as we move through the process. So, but I do think we really need to look at the best product possible, because it is the gateway into the city, and also make sure all three bridges are uniform, so people know they're passing through Roswell or coming into Roswell as they get off 400.
I would also agree. I think this is such a great opportunity to develop a distinctive brand for Roswell through the aesthetics of the bridges. Just looking at those numbers and keeping in mind that I know we need to come up with a lot of money for a lot of different projects. So I'm not sure that we can commit the highest amount right now, but I definitely think that it should be a priority going forward. As far as looking at option and considering options, I think that's probably something we need to do just until we know exactly how much we have to invest in it.
I'd like to say I agree the aesthetics are very important, because this is a major gateway into our city. We refer to South Atlanta Street as a gateway, but I would venture to say 400 is right up there as far as transporting people into our community. I would like to say, though, this is the beginning of the discussion. We've got a lot of tough decisions to make. Mm-hmm. We've got some enormous financial decisions to make very soon. So while we might have a year looking at the design of a bridge, we don't have that amount of time in factoring in what kind of money we have to allocate to this. So I would just encourage everyone to consider what we've got on the table right now, our partnership with GDOT, and how we move forward with that. Also, it's my understanding that GDOT has told us that the aesthetics are on us, on the bridges, period. So while they'll build a bridge, they will not do the aesthetics. So, and then we've also got other partnership agreements we need to come to with GDOT. So I think we need to look at the big picture when determining our financial resources and where we allocate them to.
Rob, I think what this is going to come down to eventually is you're going to probably have to show us the component costs of each design and allow us to kind of get a feel for what we can do and can't do inside of whatever our budget numbers are. It's hard to say, is it that design that's the lowest price or that design that's the highest? What's in the middle? And we don't know what the components of design add. So as we go through this, right, some help there would be great.
Well, let me also interject. I asked staff to use the Big Creek Bridge as a baseline, because that went through the whole public process on the designs we would like. I would venture to say this Windy Hill Road bridge, we would all be crucified if we built that in Roswell. So staff does need some direction on design, and that's why I suggested the Big Creek Bridge as a baseline. And the citizens liked it, the business community liked it, the elected officials liked what we came up for with Big Creek. So I'd suggest that we take the elements of that and then maybe break it down a little bit more.
Into the component costs. That's
Right.
really what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, but use that design.
So yeah, when everybody liked this, I don't know how. When everybody liked this concept of the Big Creek Parkway Bridge, I don't know if everybody have clear the $2.250 million for aesthetics. I don't know if this was clear on the mind of everybody, how much money will cost just for the aesthetics or for this particular aesthetics. I don't know if people really thought about if it's worth $2.25 million for the aesthetic, for this particular aesthetics or not. So now that you kind of open the cost, and maybe people now can focus the attention and thinking about the $2.25 million for aesthetics, if this is really what everybody wants or not. So, and it's great to see now other options and with other costs to see where we maximize the aesthetics and minimize the cost of aesthetics. So that was a great exercise, and I think that everybody should start thinking and focusing on the cost of aesthetic. And then while the operational and performance of the bridge is not much that, I guess we can say we're not engineers and technicians to design operational bridges, but aesthetics, then this we can have a say on the aesthetic part of the component of the bridge. So I think that opening the cost into operational and aesthetics is very useful for everybody to have a clear understanding of the total cost of the bridge.
One point I want to make sure everyone's clear of, while it's ideal that we decide what we want Holcomb Bridge and decide what we want the southern connection to look like in the next 4 months and give GDOT that guidance and have GDOT construct it and we pay for it 100%, that's not a absolute requirement. If you remember how we handled the fence on Holcomb Bridge that we built in the past 12 months through the bond funding, we could wait 4 years until GDOT's project is complete and retrofit a fence and a lighting on top of what they decide to build and just make it clear that we intend on doing this and save this discussion for another day. It's up to you. What I was going to recommend, and we'll see if this is the consensus of the group or not, based on what I think I'm hearing, that you want to consider a less expensive option than the $5 million and the $3 million, staff could work and prepare for a committee, let's say in September, for what branded Roswell options would look like on Holcomb Bridge and the Southern Bridge and Big Creek. With a target number, I'm just going to throw out $1 million, maybe say it's $1.5 million, give you a couple of different variations on what spending that type of money would look like. It will likely follow some of the examples that I gave you for the other bridges in Metro Atlanta, but we will not be able to achieve the look of Encore or achieve the look of what I'm showing on the screen right now if we were limited to, say, $1 million or $2 million and not 8 total.
I just wanted to, I guess, point out, or there was a study, it looks like, that was done in 2013, and I assume that design plan also had a lot of public input for the Holcomb Bridge Road corridor at 400.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, for me personally, I understand that went through a big process too. I mean, there's some things about that design that I really like a lot, and I think they represent Roswell very well. So, if there's a way that we can look at some of these elements as well.
If you would like us to do what I just explained
Yeah,
and
and
bring basically the exact same exercise we did this month.
Right.
Instead of applying the Big Creek approved look to the other 2 bridges, we would apply the picture from the Holcomb Bridge corridor study that you're looking at on your screen to Big Creek and to the Southern Bridge and show you what those numbers
Yeah,
look
I mean,
like.
it seems to me like there is some way to kind of blend the two. It seems to me like the Big Creek design should have influenced this study more than it did. So that's where I'm seeing a little bit of, incongruence here in the designs that we're looking at.
From our perspective, Big Creek was started and approved before the corridor study came in, and you're correct, they don't exactly match. It would be, in order to achieve a similar look of across all three bridges, yes, it would make sense that you would take Big Creek and apply it to the other two, or you would take Holcomb Bridge and apply it to the other two.
Again, I think we could discuss this all day, so I think that it's gonna matter to what the mayor said about our finances. We get one chance at possibly the design of the bridge when it comes through, other than retrofitting. So I think we need to understand really what our base is, what we want the bridge to look like as far as the design. I mean, because I think that bridge is probably going to be a different design than what we get if we just say we're going to retrofit it, correct?
That's correct.
So what is our base that we can then build upon in the future with money if we start with that? So I don't know. I think we need to know where we are, and then what we could do after, because that's just a normal bridge, correct?
To better explain this, Councilmember Judy, we could retrofit and achieve the look of those two bridges, or the Windy Hill Bridge. Skip scan would be a little bit more difficult. We
Right.
would not be able to retrofit and achieve the look of Encore Parkway or achieve the look of the Big Creek Bridge or the Holcomb Bridge corridor study graphic that Councilmember Wills is looking at.
Correct.
It's a retrofit option gives us options for fencing and for lighting primarily, not necessarily the structure and the look of the bridge itself.
So I guess my thought is you make sure the structure looks good, and we maybe don't spend as much on the fences or the top part, and we figure out how we get to that in the future, or if that's even an option. I don't know. I'm just saying it's all got to be based upon money. So we just need to. It is. You're going to drive through three bridges, then you're going to hit Encore Parkway, and you're going to be like, well, what happened? So, I want to make sure we are where we look good going up, because, hey, I'm going to get off here, I'm going to get off here, I'm going to get off here. Or coming down, which has happened even more often, people coming north to south. I think it's very important. So for me, we could go round and round and round, and we just need to know what it looks like.
Yeah, this whole project is the whole east-west project, connectivity project is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Let's get the operational piece together, and then as we go through the next few months, let's get it as close to the way we'd like it to look as possible.
Staff will bring this back for you to committee early as September or October then. Thank you.
You have everything you need?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, consideration to use tree bank funds in the amount not to exceed $20,000 for landscaping on the Hardscrabble Green Loop project.
Item number 4 this morning is also a follow-up that you may not remember. It's been so long. November 2018, we brought a request to you to use tree funds on 2 parcels along Hardscrabble Road. These funds were required based on our right-of-way agreements with the 2 parcel owners. During right-of-way negotiations, the city committed to planting trees as requested by the property owners due to loss of landscaping by the project. We brought this to you in November of last year, and your direction to us was to work with city staff and develop a phased landscaping plan for the entire corridor. We are here tonight, we're here this morning to bring this item back to you and to bring the phased plan in the item immediately following it. Graphics showing you the 2 parcels. Parcel 9 is immediately before the roundabout on the west side of Hardscrabble Road. We are installing a living fence requested by the property owner not to exceed $5,000. Parcel 25 is at the east end of the project. It is the Fulton County Board of Ed Sweet Apple Elementary site right before Etris. We are replacing some Leland cypresses that were removed during construction. Normally, this contract amount isn't required for city council approval, but because we're using tree funds, the item is before you this morning.
So have we met the expectations of the property owners?
Yes, ma'am.
I would vote to approve.
Second.
Motion approved by Mayor Henry, second by Councilor Judy. Any discussion or questions? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Item number 5, discussion and implement a landscaping plan along the Hardscrabble Green Loop project.
This item is directly related to the previous item. This is the staff effort to develop a phased landscaping plan for the entire stretch of the Hardscrabble Green Loop project from Roswell High School, King Road, to East Road, Sweet Apple Elementary. I do have graphics on the screen, but I've also brought hard copies with me. It's a little bit tough to see the graphics. If any of you would like to see the hard copies I have there right here for me, just raise your hand. This item was brought to you again from November. The landscaping plan calls for approximately 200 trees planted along Hardscrabble Road between the limits of the project, between Key and Etris. You'll see in the plan that the greatest concentration of plantings focus around the roundabout area and the frontage of the Wexford subdivision. North and south of the roundabout, we have evenly spaced trees on the west side and the east side. The cost for the entire plan, materials and labor to implement the entire 200 tree plan from King to Etris is approximately $125,000. The next 5 graphics are basically just sheets from the plan showing you the west side of this graphic is where my cursor is, King Road. Here's Roswell High School here. As I page through, you'll see we get to the roundabout moving east. There's Wexford moving east. World Harvest Church is this sheet. And this little stub of Chafin Road off to the south is sheet number 5. Our recommendation for you here this morning is to consider this plan in the FY20 recommendations that Community Development will be bringing you at a future committee meeting, similar to what they did last year. This entire plan, again, is $125,000. Based on discussion with Deputy Director Lenore Bromberg and Finance, there is approximately $400,000 for you to consider tree plans that are available in the tree funding account.
Floor is open.
So, quick question, beside the 200 trees to be planted, which other elements would contemplate this landscaping for $125,000? Or just only the,
I'm looking for Jay Reisinger, is this in the back?
any other
Jay
elements
Reisinger.
beside the 200?
Jay Reisinger, is there
$425,000?
anything in this phased landscaping plan besides the trees?
Yeah, except for the required. Jay, you gotta come up.
Sorry about that.
Come on, Dad.
Transportation worked with Recreation and Parks to deliver the plan, and Jay Reisinger was responsible for a lot of the design.
As far as the landscape, the additional landscape, the only landscape that we had or added was around the residence there that was pointed out earlier. As far as shrubs, right? And that was it as far as, shrubs.
Then, I came with an average of $625 per tree. Is this something standard, the cost of planting 200 trees at $625 a tree? Is something like normal and standard?
Including labor and materials, yes, that cost was generated based on past experiences with the companies that do landscaping, and transportation received that cost estimate from the Recreation and Parks Department.
Thank you.
Ron, what's the feedback from the Wexford Homeowners Association?
We have not directly engaged Wexford as a result of this plan. We spoke, I believe the mayor spoke with them probably last year sometime when the project was starting, but staff has not had any communication with them.
Well, driving through there yesterday and the day before, it's very much needed. I think the project will look really good once we get this done. Look better, and I think that, obviously a lot of stuff was taken out to make that happen, and I think this will be excellent, so I'd be all for bringing this to committee, or to the next budget, whatever you're doing with it.
Need a motion on this?
No.
Need action?
Guidance.
No.
Guidance.
Okay. All you need?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We're on item number 6, consideration of a contract modification on IGA revision to the Chattahoochee pedestrian bridge.
Mayor and Council, this is on a project that we don't talk a lot because it's been going pretty smooth, but it's a very exciting initiative that we are moving forward into the right-of-way process in conjunction with Sandy Springs. For those of you who don't remember, graphic on the screen, we are constructing a new bridge over the Chattahoochee River directly east of State Route 9 to accommodate bicycles and pedestrians. For those of you familiar with that bridge and drive over it every day, it's very, very dangerous to walk over that bridge, but you'd be surprised how many people do it every day. There are MARTA bus stops on both sides. There are people who want to use the amenities in one city and live in the other, and it's surprising to me how many people we see walking over that bridge. This project began in 2011. The city hired an engineering firm, Heath and Lineback, to begin the design and the permitting process. At the time, interestingly enough, we were using a federal earmark back when federal earmarks were issued. At the time, Representative Johnny Isaacson got us that earmark, and we used $3 million to start this project. We broke it out $400,000 towards the design process and put the remaining 2.6 towards construction. Over time, changing environmental guidelines, changing in payroll, changing in project management responsibilities, changing in some of the subconsultants for Heath and Lineback. We actually had a couple of companies that were originally on board and contracted to do this work that don't do business anymore. There's a long list of small amounts that add up to the additional design money that we're asking you to move forward with today. Based on the intergovernmental agreement we have with Sandy Springs, the earmark is paying 80% of the design costs, and the cities are responsible for 50-50 sharing the remainder. The amount we are asking for you to consider today is $112,000. Based on discussions with Sandy Springs, they understand that we will be sharing this 50-50 with them. They are working through a very similar mayor and council approval process. Roswell staff met with Sandy Springs staff a week ago, and they still fully support this project. It's just going to take time for them to get it through mayor and council, like similar to ours. We are expecting their approval to happen based on current schedule on August 20th of 2019. To refresh, the design share cost for Roswell and Sandy Springs is increasing from 100 to 156. We do have that additional $56,000 for Roswell sitting in our budget account for the project.
Floor is open.
Motion to move forward to the agenda.
Motion to move forward by Councilmember Tyser. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor, please raise your hands. Marie, did you have a question?
Oh.
Okay. Thank you. Item number 7, consideration to sign an agreement with Georgia Power to pay $67,902 for the relocation of utilities required by the Rucker Road T-Splosh project. Mr. Del Ross.
Thank you, Gary. Item number 7 is for Rucker Road. This is our T-Splosh Tier 1 project that is under construction right now. This is the road that, if all of you are familiar with the north side of town, Alpharetta has closed Rucker Road along their portion all summer long. They're getting ready to open it back up before day 1 of school here in the next couple of weeks. Normally, we would bring a utility agreement like this to you before construction is authorized, but this was a little bit of a strange situation. It does not happen very often. The graphic up on the screen is an engineering graphic that I can explain to you in brief terms. Typically on linear projects like this, Georgia Power facilities are located on right-of-way, and for road projects, Georgia Power would be responsible for paying 100% of those relocation costs. During right-of-way deed research and discussions with Georgia Power, it just so happened that 2 of the poles being impacted for this project were located on private easement. And based on the terms of our franchise agreement with Georgia Power, poles located on private easement are the city's responsibility for costs. We're asking you to authorize $67,000 towards the relocation of those 2 poles, and we have funding available in our general fund Rucker Road Improvements Project to pay that bill.
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Councilmember Judy. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Wilsey. Discussion or questions? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Item number 8, consideration for the mayor and city council to approve installation of paid parking in the south end of Canton Street and Elizabeth Way. Mr. Del Rossi.
Thank you, Gary. I've invited our transportation planning manager, Mr. Dave Cox, to give you an update on where we are for the paid parking in the city of Roswell.
Thank you, Rob. Do we have a clicker or mine? Thanks. Appreciate it. Well, good morning. Just a quick background on parking in Roswell. Back in 2017, we had a lot of concerns and complaints about parking. A variety of topics were covered. The historic Roswell Business Association had a very good point on trying to increase turnover on the on-street parking spaces on Canton Street and Elizabeth Way. The concern was, people were taking the spots for several hours, or employees of the businesses were kind of taking the spots, for a good part of the day or for the evening. So they wanted to have a way to get them to kindly move out to let people come in and dine and have a few drinks and then head out their way and get more people down there on those parking spaces. So last November, council directed us to research various parking options and some technologies over the winter months, and we came back to you last May, about 2 months ago, to bring the parking ordinance, which you guys approved just a couple weeks ago, earlier this month, and also to pursue the implementation options on these technologies, like pursuing a kiosk, the smartphone application, and discuss some enforcement. Just to refresh, we have taken a lot of great steps towards addressing the parking needs of downtown. This council has moved to implement 3 new parking lots. We've leased these parking lots, which during peak hours on the weekends can generate upwards of 240 free parking spaces to help our citizens and the business community in downtown. So that was a big step forward. The transportation department converted the delivery parking space, this right by Going with the Flow, we converted to a rideshare space during the evening, so Uber and Lyft drivers can park there, and it's had some success getting people to drop off and pick up there. And then, as you heard earlier this morning, we're studying the feasibility for a potential hawk signal to better link Canton Street to City Hall. Here's an existing parking overview. Here's the free parking as of today, the green. We also have the 2 lease lots that we pay. The parking is available for free to the public on certain nights and weekends. There's still the private lots that charge a fee that we do not control. And then obviously there's the East Alley lot, which is the blue right here, which is a public lot that we started charging pay for. That was started over a year ago. And again, here are the 3 lease lots up here at Green Street by the fire station, the Harlow lot at the corner of Norcross and Canton, and then the Methodist Church down here off Magnolia. And of course, you have over 400 parking spaces at City Hall. But what we're going to focus on, and what you tasked us to focus on, was this area right here on Canton Street. Here's kind of a zoomed in view of it. We're not going to be talking about the East Alley lot or the rideshare space right here, but this is the green area. It's approximately 38 spaces that are on-street parking. And we were talking about, when we talked in May, putting a kiosk on the corner, the southeast corner of Elizabeth and Canton Street. So this is the parking zone that we were tasked to implement, and we wanted to discuss with you today. A recap on the technology, the smartphone application. It's free. It's used in Atlanta and several other cities around the area. It's by Park Mobile. And the kiosk we already have in East Alley today. And we would implement one like this today. It would look just like that on the corner of Elizabeth and Canton Street. And that's through a company called Parkion, who provides the equipment. The benefits, there's no startup cost for the phone app. They can be operational in just a few weeks. It's available in several other markets here in the metro Atlanta area. The kiosk is great because you don't have to have a smartphone to park. You can just have one kiosk. It's very familiar to users because it's all over Atlanta, and it's also in our East Alley lot. So these are the 2 ones you asked us to pursue. We wanted to, again, remind you of the cost of these. Both of them require a small credit card or debit card processing fee. That's pretty standard. So for every $1 you collect, you may only get 97 cents on the dollar, to be aware of that. The one little caveat, we talked about this in May, the smartphone app does charge a small user fee, a convenience fee of 35 cents for the user. That's not to the city, that's for the person driving the vehicle and trying to park. So if we offer, let's say, 2 hours of free parking, the users of the smartphone app may be paying a small convenience fee. So, is it technically free parking? That's just something to bear in mind. Other cities, I believe Lakeland, Florida is using this model. They have a 2-hour free parking, but they use the app that charges the fee. The kiosk equipment costs about $8,000, and there's an annual cost of around $700 to $800 for the connection, the data connection for the cellular technology. But based on what we heard from Public Works and their kiosk, you recoup the cost in usually under a year. And given this will be out on Canton Street, we would expect the time frame to be a little less than that. These are the parking rates that East Alley currently uses. This was approved by the council last year. They're basically the same with the exception of the first 2 hours. So apparently before 6 o'clock, the first 2 hours are free, but after 6 o'clock, there's $1 per hour charge. And then it escalates from there. But again, this was primary to promote turnover and, get people to not park there for several hours or overnight. But these are the established rates, so keep that in mind. That's what staff will recommend if we do move forward with this. We would just continue what we already have as far as parking rates. The enforcement is the other issue. During the East Alley implementation, they use these warning cards. City staff would go out there and put warning cards on vehicles. I believe there's a security camera out there that they use to monitor parking to make sure people aren't camped out there for several hours. So just as a friendly implementation, we just did a warning card. However, moving forward, we'll have to revisit this because we'd have to either hire part-time parking enforcement or hire an outside contractor to handle parking once we get out of this introductory period. So that'll be something we'll have to discuss. So we'll open it up for questions, but if we move forward with this, and this is mainly for Gary, we would need action on establishing a new parking zone, the parking rates, and for the authorization for staff to move forward on securing these or signing contracts. So
Quick question regarding the handicap spaces. Out of the 38, how many would be for handicap in this area, the green area here on the screen?
We talked about this in May. I think you had the same comment. I think the direction of the council was not to charge for handicap parking. So I believe
how many will be there out of the 38? How many will be?
I think there's 3, I think there's 4 handicap spaces. One here. I think there's one on this side, and there's a couple down here. So maybe upwards of 4.
So out of 38 would be 4.
I believe so. Yes.
And this is a usual proportion, or? Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
So on this, I think there's been a lot of misinformation on what we're trying to do here. Obviously, the city's not going to get rich off a dollar fee. This has been brought forward by a lot of the business owners there about churning spaces for to encourage business and people not sitting there all day long, or employees parking there, etc. I would recommend the 4 spaces on this side of the street be taken out because you've got to cross the street to the kiosk, and some people my dad probably couldn't figure out the app, and then he'd have to cross the street and all that. So I would say that would be tough. I mean, and that's just 4 spaces on that side, but that would be an opinion of mine. And I think that this will be a good way to get people moving there, and especially during the day. And it is free, so that's the first 2 hours are free, and so that's it. People say, well, you're now charging us parking. Well, it's not. It's free for the first 2 hours to make sure people can get in and out there. So I'm excited about this. I want to move it forward. I think that the business owners down there are excited about it as well from speaking with them. I haven't spoken with all of them. I've spoken with a few. So I'm excited about this.
So yeah, I believe the faster that we can move forward, the better. As far as your 35-cent concern, if you don't want to pay the 35 cents for the convenience fee, walk over to the kiosk and do it. But I use Park Mobile frequently. It's very easy. It also would allow us in the future, if we ever wanted to change hours or change times or have a special event day or something like that where we need to change it, you can specifically tell it what you want to do. The one thing, there are two things that I'd like to encourage. One is, I'm not sure that I like the after six charge. I can't remember doing that. Apparently we did. And then the other thing that I would recommend is, let's get the most stable communication that we can get. I think you've included that in your monthly fee. What we've had in East Alley had been problematic where it wasn't working. It's not worth it to not have it working. But I also would like to underscore what Councilmember Judy said. This is not for the city to make money. This is to increase turns, and move people through those prime parking places so that our merchants can benefit from people coming and going and spending money in their businesses. So this works in a lot of other places. To get this thing going, I think is really important. I think once it's there, just like with East Alley, it works great. I saw some argument from, or some discussion about, employees. We've provided the Green Street lot free of charge for them, and I think we haven't left them out in cold.
That's correct.
So yeah, I think that these 38 spaces will encourage the short-term parking, which is the main objective here, turning. So I support those 38 spaces to be for charge.
It's my understanding you're also asking us if we want to approve the kiosk or the smartphone only.
Well, when we discussed this in May, we were tasked with bringing both technologies to this location.
And
So it's not one or the
I
other.
think the kiosk is important for consistency to the consumer.
Okay.
One thing, going forward with this, and, I love the way you did the map, the color-coded map. And I think that if we could do a version of this that was made available to folks with all the communications that we send out to the newspapers, and even if there was a way to post that on a little kiosk somewhere downtown, just so that people were aware of the different options that they have, I think it would really help us to get the message out.
We have all of this in GIS, so it is available.
I think it's important to note there's 240 free parking spaces
Right.
that we've come up with, and the fees that are going to be paid just, in the last year and a half, and the fees that are going to be paid on these 36 spots won't even come close to paying for the free parking that we have provided as a city. So this is again for the merchants, and I motion to approve the kiosk, and do I need a motion?
So there's a couple things. We have the technologies, let staff procure the contracts and execute them for the smartphone app, which is a 3-year commitment, 0 cost, and the kiosk, which is with the annual fee, about $9,000. And then we also have to do the parking rates to make sure you're comfortable with them, and approve that zone, that these spaces minus the handicap spaces.
Okay, so I'll start. I motion to approve the
All that.
technology, the app, and the kiosk.
Second.
Does that capture everything you need?
The parking rate.
Do you want to do all three at
doing
once?
it all
Well, I don't know, whatever's the
We
most
can do all three
appropriate.
at once. I was going to do it three. Okay,
them all at once.
motion to approve that the technology, motion to approve the rates, and motion to approve. I would like to take those 4 spaces out. What are your thoughts? No?
Can you remove the $1 after 6? So that they're
Well,
2
then
hours.
we got to change the previous one.
We've got a resolution in place right now, so
Yeah.
we would need to do a resolution. Do you want to change it?
If we're going to split that up, let's just do one motion, we'll vote, do the next motion, vote. That'll be easier for us.
Just for
I'd like to leave
clarity,
the 4 in
that
for now.
diagram
Okay.
needs to be changed.
Which one?
That should be after.
Oh, sorry, after 6 p.m.
Okay. So you want me to do 3 individual motions?
Just 3 separate, yeah.
Okay.
We'll
Motion approves the technology needed with the app and the kiosk.
Motion to approve, is that second by Councilmember Tizer? Thank you. Any further questions or discussion on that? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Go ahead.
Motion to approve the 38 spaces parking zone.
Yes, just to approve, oops, sorry, wrong way.
Second.
Those spaces, and if you do or do not want the handicap spaces, I understand you do not want to include the handicap.
Without the handicap spaces.
Okay, so motion to approve by Councilmember Judy, second by Councilmember Zapata. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you.
And to be clear, that includes the 4 spots on the west side?
That's fine.
Okay.
And the last was motion to approve the rates set forth in the previous.
So rates as proposed
Resolution.
by staff. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by the mayor. Any further questions or discussion? All in
Yeah,
favor, please raise your hand.
Just real quick, we're approving the rates for
The 38.
38,
Zones.
not for East Alley.
Correct.
So I'm-
approved.
Yeah, these are already approved for East Alley.
I'm a little confused why we would need a new resolution to fix East Alley,
If you want to fix it.
If you
or
want.
we could leave it alone and we could change the first 2 hours after 6 to free. They would just be different?
The motion applies only to the 38.
Sorry.
We need to be consistent.
The motion applies only to the 38 right now. If you want to change that, you need a separate motion,
So we can come back later and fix it if we choose to?
or you can do it
I'm-
at
I'm-
the
I'm-
meeting.
I'm fine coming back later.
Okay.
If this causes an issue, we'll come back and take the dollar out later.
Motion to approve the parking rates as on the screen.
Thank you. Who seconded that? Was that a second? Is there a second? Mayor Henry? Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Thanks, gents.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Moving on to finance, item number 9. Consideration to award a contract for tree cutting services. Mr. Luckett.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We have a current citywide contract for tree cutting services. This contract is set to expire in the next month, and we were requested to go back out for another invitation to bid to renew or to do a new tree cutting services contract. The bid was issued. We received 5 responses. The services include tree cutting, pruning, stump grinding, chipping, and arborist consultations. Of the 5 vendor responses that we received, 1 of those was deemed non-responsive. After reviewing the bids that we've received, we are recommending awarding a contract to Richmond Tree Experts. They were deemed to be the responsible bidder with the lowest responsive bid. The annual contract value is estimated at $110,907, but that will vary based upon actual usage. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Floor is open.
Can you give me the actual cost, for the previous year?
So on average, we spent about $127,000 annually, and that's for the departments that use the contracts, the citywide contracts, and multiple departments use it.
So what's the additional cost? In other words, we have a contract for $110,907, but you're estimating it to come in at $122. What additional costs do we incur throughout the year?
We're estimating the new contract to be $110,907, and we're saying in the past, we've spent on average about $127.
Okay, so that was the contractual price?
Yes.
Okay.
So based on the bid that was put out there, we estimated the number of, the amount of usage that we've seen over the last couple of years. So taking that usage with the prices proposed by the respondents, that's how we get to the estimated contract price.
Thank you.
Did all the bidder offer the same level of service? It's exactly,
Yes.
so it's just the difference of dollar amount, but the level of service, all of them offer the same?
Correct.
Great. So I can make a motion. Motion to approve.
Second.
Second by Councilman Woolsey. Any further discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Moving on to police. Item number 10, consideration of the mayor and/or city administrator to set a contract with Red Speed Automated School Zone. Scott Ratliff. Good morning.
Good morning. So this is a consideration for mayor and council to look at entering a contract with Red Speed for automated school zone enforcement, as well as in addition of a ordinance to be able to enforce those regulations. Mr. Parks is here with Red Speed. He's going to do a short presentation just to give an overview of the program and how it would function.
Thank you, Captain. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for your time. I'm Greg Parks with Red Speed. I have a very short presentation, as we're late in your meeting, probably 10 minutes. But if you want me to speed up, let me know. If you want me to clarify anything as I'm going, please let me know as well. But it's a pleasure to be here, discuss what has been a very popular program in Georgia, something we think can bring a lot of value to your school safety. We'll talk a little bit about a school study, speed study we did in conjunction with your police department. As every other jurisdiction we've worked with in Florida, there is a high level of speeding around your schools, and it's not a reflection on the city or your police department. It's the level of traffic in Metro Atlanta right now. But over the last 9 years, pedestrian fatalities are up 35% throughout the U.S. So pedestrian safety is of great importance. Georgia is ranked 36th out of 51, that's 50 states plus Puerto Rico, in school zone safety. So there is a definite problem statewide to use some unique and out-of-the-box methods to address. Georgia passed in the session that ended July 2018, House Bill 978, to address this problem. We do this all around the country, and while all legislatures have pros and cons, and I'm sure as local legislators you would agree with that, but this is a very fair law. I'm going to go over some of the highlights. It does allow for statewide enforcement. A school zone is designed as 1,000 feet within a public or private school. Violations must be at least 10 miles over the posted speed limit. And Captain or Chief, I believe in officer enforcement, you can enforce a 1 or 2 over in a school zone. So this does give quite a buffer to the motorist. And without getting too granular on this, as your more high-level policy, but we're actually going to recommend 11 miles over instead of 10 due to the accuracy of the radar plus or minus 1 mile per hour to be consistent with state law. Warning signs must be placed prior to the location. One of our customers in Gwinnett, we've agreed to put additional flashing ambers in the school zones, and we'll certainly be willing to do that in Fulton County. We're negotiating our contract now with Alpharetta, so if you all were fortunate to move forward, we could consider that as well too. We want to do a very robust public education campaign in conjunction with that, which I'll talk about. But with your public information officers, your comm staff, social media content, PSAs, ads in the paper, it should not be a surprise to anybody. We want this to be a very well documented program. Speed is only enforced on days school's in session from an hour before to an hour after. So it's only when children could be present. During breaks, summer, winter, after school, automated enforcement cannot be used. Back to the attempted fairness of the law to improve safety while children could be in the school zones. GDOT must approve and issue permits for each location based on need. So if there was a school zone that did not have a need that GDOT perceived and could document, we could not put it there in conjunction with our local partners. It's a pretty reasonable fine compared again to an officer ticket. It's $75 for the first violation, $125 for subsequent violations. It's a red shirt owner violation, no points or insurance by law. Non-payment results in denial of motor vehicle registration. That's again to put some teeth in the law. The best way to modify behavior is to get motorists to slow down. And the fines must be used to support local public safety initiatives. Again, that was an onus the legislature wanted to take on, that it wouldn't be viewed as a fine or a tax to go to the general fund. The idea is motorists that are violating the school zone speeds, their fine revenue was going back into additional officers, speed equipment, vehicles, body cameras,
et cetera, to be used for law enforcement, and that is by statute. We talked about the need to document for GDOT that there is a problem there, and for you as the governing body that this is a program of value to you. So we worked with your police department and did a test at 6 schools for 1 day, and all had very high levels of speeders. Now, we'll talk a little bit later. I don't believe the police department is considering implementing the whole program at once, but these are the schools that did show a documented safety problem. Why is reducing speed important? And a lot of this is intuitive, but it also is axiomatic. Slowing people down dramatically decreases the stopping distance and also improves mortality rate. 5 mile per hour reduction is an amazing improvement in mortality rate if a child is struck. A little bit about our solution. There's no flash. I believe you guys have had some photo enforcement in the past, are probably familiar with that. Citizens find that distracting and annoying, and again, it's intuitive that it's dangerous, so it is an infrared system. One of the things that our law enforcement partners have liked is our system comes with built-in automatic license plate recognition that will allow, if a motorist with a temporary protection order, a sex offender enters the school zone, the police will be notified real time of that. Again, and that comes at no cost to the jurisdiction. Also allows 45 days of video archive. So if there is an attempted a crash or worse in the school zone, officers in the field real time and up to 45 days past can recreate that incident from their car, from their desktop, provide some amazing evidentiary tools to protect the children in the school zones. The program is new to Georgia, as I mentioned. We've done this around the country since 2006. In the last few months, we've been marketing this. 20 programs are now contracted, and they're coming at a few more per month. The closest ones to you would be Duluth, Lilburn, a number in Clayton County, and we just were awarded the Alpharetta RFP 2 weeks ago, I believe. So we will be working with Fulton County. And I'd worked with your police staff. We do have the approval of Fulton County Schools to implement the program as the governing body elects to move forward. I mentioned GDOT permit is required. A few weeks ago, I guess July 3rd, a little more than a few weeks ago, we did receive the first permit, so the programs are moving fast. If you did elect to move forward on this, it's about 90 days from contract to permit execution, school system approval, et cetera, but should become quicker and quicker as GDOT gets a replicable process. I mentioned Alpharetta did the only RFP. The rest have been awarded by sole source in the state, and we're pleased that it worked out for us. I guess that's why I have it on there. But that does allow for cooperative purchasing if y'all wanted to move forward that way. We have a very short video. It's 5 minutes, I think, which goes through what the system would look like on your roads, et cetera. I think you're right, Captain. I don't think the video came over the email. Yeah, we do. Good.
For more than 2 decades,
You all hear that?
speeding has been involved in approximately 1/3 of all motor vehicle fatalities. According to the U.S. Department of Transportation, in 2017, speeding was a contributing factor in 27% of all fatal crashes. Speed also affects your ability even when you're driving at the speed limit, but too fast for road conditions, such as when a road is under repair, during bad weather, or in an area at night that isn't well lit. Speeding endangers not only the life of the speeder, but all the people on the road around them. In July 2018, Georgia legislature enacted law to enforce school zone speeds with automated photo enforcement cameras. Specifically, it's a statewide law. School zones are defined as an area within 1,000 feet of the boundary of any public or private elementary or secondary schools. Violations are issued for speeds exceeding posted speed limit by 10 miles per hour, and signs must be posted 500 feet prior to the camera location. Speed may be enforced only when school is in session, and 1 hour before and 1 hour after classes. There's a $75 fine for the first violation, and a $125 fine for the second and subsequent violations. Non-payment of the fine results in denial of annual motor vehicle registration. and all proceeds of fines must be used to support local policing initiatives, such as body cameras and school resource officers, to name a few. Red Speed Georgia is a turnkey speed photo enforcement provider with over a decade experience in creating and maintaining photo enforcement programs for over 80 communities in 4 states. Red Speed will help you identify possible camera locations by conducting in-depth speed studies, compile all necessary paperwork for permit applications, purchase, install, and maintain camera equipment, and provide full back-office support for the entire violation lifecycle. All services are provided at no cost to your community, paid for by violators exceeding the school zone speed limit. Red Speed's speed cameras can not only enforce speed, they can also provide your police department with enhanced video and license plate recognition capability. Red Speed's turnkey photo enforcement solution improves school zone safety, provides revenue for public safety initiatives, and comes at no cost to the municipality. Red Speed's speed camera technology uses 3D object tracking radar detection, an above-ground, non-invasive detection method with lane-specific identification and speed triggers that record accurate speeds within plus or minus 1 mile per hour. The radar is powerful enough to simultaneously track up to 350 objects in its field of view. In addition to issuing speed violations, comprehensive speed statistics are compiled by the system and can help clients determine if there is a need for additional enforcement. The system performs a daily startup calibration check and will start enforcement only after all checks are passed successfully. Red Speed's speed cameras work in all weather conditions and can be configured to work simultaneously with video surveillance and automatic license plate recognition. Video. The Red Speed system provides both real-time video streaming and 45-day video archive access via any web-enabled device, PC, smartphone, or tablet. Authorized users can access HD video from any of the overview and lane-specific video camera streams, define the time of interest, and download the video clips directly on their device. No forms, no requests, no delay in waiting for a vendor to respond. Lane-specific video cameras are zoomed in to provide clear identification of vehicle features, color, make, model, and license plate images for all lanes of enforcement. Combination of overview video and lane-specific video allows for crime investigators to not only trace a vehicle through the intersection, but also read its plate. License plate recognition. The license plate recognition module is a real-time license plate identification system with a centralized plate archive across all LPR-enabled cameras that works simultaneously with the speed enforcement system. LPR leverages existing camera photo enforcement hardware and scans all vehicle plates that pass by the lane-specific video camera's field of view. LPR supports real-time Amber Alert functionality with text or email notifications to individual or groups of authorized recipients. LPR can import existing state and federal hot lists, generate custom hot lists, and export plate archive databases to third-party applications already in use by the customer.
So while speed reduction and mitigation is the main purpose of the legislation that was passed, it is an outstanding opportunity at no cost to your taxpayers to provide Amber Alert functionality, et cetera.
Thank you.
So again, it's a turnkey program. There's absolutely zero cost to the city. There's no training, no postage, anything. It's a straight revenue split of the citation, 65-35, 65 to the city. And for that, we provide all construction, maintenance, printing, mailing. All violations must be approved by your police force, not a private vendor. So those that the police approves will mail, build a website for the motorists to view, and again, provide all the video management, ALPR, et cetera. Again, this is what the system will look like. There's no flash. It's all video-based, provides remote archive, also provides live viewing. So if there's an incident in the school system, any officer from his or her car, smartphone, tablet can monitor live the school zone. So first we do the site analysis, which we've completed. Camera installation, again, about 90 days. Motorists can pay online or by snail mail check, and these would be adjudicated in your municipal court as a full right to a hearing as you have now. Contract's very fair and flexible. I believe your city attorney has reviewed it, but there's not a long-term commitment by the city. We put the onus on us. The contract can be terminated any time. There's a very small penalty with under a year that would be revenue positive, certainly, to the city. Again, prior to going live, we'll do at least a 30-day warning period, and that's 30 school days, so about 45 calendar days. During this warning period, lots of robust public education and social media, signage, PSAs, newspaper ads. All of this would be customized for Roswell, approved by your police and comps staff. There's an example that we've done, and we're very open. Again, this should not be a surprise to anybody here. So, in conclusion, it's an opportunity at no cost to your taxpayer to dramatically improve school zones where there is a large number of speeding, to provide the ALPR and the video-based enforcement for Amber Alert, et cetera, for your police. And we'll provide an opportunity. A number of Fulton County communities are very close to coming on board, so it'll provide some great regional data sharing with Alpharetta and some of the other communities, Sandy Springs and others that are considering this. So I wanted to keep that short, but I'm sure there's some questions or anything that I can.
I just want to add something real quick before we go to questions. So this is obviously a new program to Georgia. Looking at the national statistics, where it's been implemented elsewhere, within that first 30-day warning period, they actually get a mailer, just like they would a citation. It says, hey, this is a warning. This program's going on. They actually see about a 60% reduction in violations during that first 30 days. So it does work. And that's something that really touched me when I started doing research on it. So I just wanted to pass that along to you guys as well.
Floor is open.
So I have a couple of questions. Number one, what else can you tell us about Red Speed in terms of ownership, in terms of operation, and even more important, in terms of data? What do you do with the data, the privacy, data privacy? How long you retain this data in your servers, and if you're allowed to sell this data to other organizations or not? That is my first question. My second question is, I understood it was $75 the first time, plus $25 electronic fee processing or something like that. So if you can explain about this $25 fee, where it goes to the city or goes to your company, beside the 65-35 percentage sharing the cost of the speed ticket. So if you can explain.
Yeah, those are good questions. Thank you.
Thanks.
To address the first one, Red Speed's been in business since 2006. Probably something I should incorporate. We have around 100 clients now throughout the country. Our references are excellent. I believe your police have had the opportunity to check them. And one of the things we scored very well high on the Alpharetta RFP were our references. We are the only vendor, and I should note this, and I know you guys have had an experience with photo enforcement in the past. We're the only vendor in this space that has no history of litigation or no contracts ever terminated. We've not sued a customer, been sued by a customer, by a citizen, and all contracts started are continuing today. I believe you asked about data and privacy. We absolutely do not sell the data that's in your contract, and if we need to beef up that language to reinforce that with you, we're happy to do. We're PCI compliant. We're CJIS ready, which is a very high FBI data standard, and we've had no issues ever of any data integrity issues. And we store the data in compliance with local and state public record retention laws. And what was your second question, sir? I apologize.
The fees.
The
$25 fee on top of the 75 first time and $125 the second time.
Yes.
And the 65-35 sharing.
Yeah, let me clarify that for you. Thank you. The law is 75 for the first violation, 125 for the second. Our contract's a 65-35 split. It does allow for $25 electronic processing. That's in the statute in House Bill 978. We do not anticipate assessing anywhere near a $25 processing cost. We anticipate there'll be around $10. That's to cover our mailing, credit card processing fees, et cetera. And that would not be split. It's the fine revenue is the split.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Gary, I got two quick questions. With our new chief coming in, is this something we want to run by him before we approve? A. B, staffing, who's going to handle these? If you looked at those numbers there, they're pretty stout coming through. Or are we going to, I just want to make sure from us point of view, we're good with what we're looking at here, and with the new chief coming in, he's good with it.
The first question, I think we're okay moving forward on this without the chief being here yet.
Okay.
And the second, I'll defer to Captain Ratliff on the staffing.
So as he said, the 6 schools that we tested, we did that on purpose to see, number one, what numbers would look like. The reason we're only starting with 1 school is to see what the manpower requirements will be on our end, to make sure that we're seeing the decrease in violations that we're expecting. So yes, while we did test those 6 schools and we did say, yes, we have a need to implement this program at all these locations, we are only looking to start with 1 to kind of evaluate how the program works for us as a city, if it's something that we want to continue. As of right now, the traffic enforcement unit, that'll be part of their responsibilities. So the hit and run investigator will essentially come in the morning. If we see the decrease that we're expecting with the 60% drop, it'll probably take him about an hour to an hour and a half to process those days' violations, and then he'll continue with his hit and run investigations. But we did factor that into account for manpower and the needs that we're going to have to provide in order to make the program successful.
Okay, and last question, as far as a officer-initiated ticket in a school zone versus a red speed initiated ticket, is there a difference in points on a license?
There is. This is actually a civil fine. Hence the reason for the ordinance that has to be implemented. So the fine process would actually be going through on a city ordinance. If you get a ticket in a school zone by an officer, there are points assessed to your driver's license. For us, essentially, this is just a force multiplier. It allows us to do enforcement at multiple locations. So right now we have 9 traffic enforcement officers and we have 15 schools in the city. So even if I have every officer out in a school zone every day, we cannot get to all of them at one time. It's just not possible. So this just allows us to cover more areas and be more productive in reducing the speed in those locations with the resources that we have.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for bringing this initiative forward. I think, that's, especially given the data that you showed, there's a real need and an opportunity to improve safety in the school zone. So I am in favor. Question about the terms or length of the contract. How is that set and established? Is it for a year, 2 years?
It's currently set for 1 year is how the contract is set up. Again, starting with 1 school allows us to kind of evaluate and see how it works for us. If we decide we want to terminate early, like you said, there is a small fee.
Yeah, the contract allows termination for convenience. After a year, the captain explained it well, after a year, there's 0 cost to municipality. If you would terminate prior to a year, because there's significant construction expense, et cetera, there's $10,000, which is not very much. Their fines will easily cover that. So direct answer to you, if terminated after a year, there's 0 cost to the municipality. If terminated under a year, it's only $10,000.
Okay, but it is something that we would evaluate at the end of a year?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, we'd be consistently evaluating.
And that's why we make the contract like that. We want the onus to be on us. We don't want the city to feel like they're locked in. We continually need to show that the safety results are there, the customer service is there.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry. I have a question. We had red light cameras that did not go very well in the city of Roswell for numerous reasons. And one of the issues we caught strong resistance from is just the whole Big Brother issue. Reading our license plates for no reason. So that was an issue as well. The other issue was the company actually pulled out all of the red light cameras because once they complied with state law, the company wasn't making any money. So my question for you is the enabling state law for this, how does it protect the citizens that were reading their license plates?
Couple of good questions there I'll try and answer. This, I believe, and I'm familiar with the poor experience, or I'm afraid they're out, so I assume it's a poor experience of red light cameras, that I give the legislature a lot of credit, that I believe in what we've seen in the 20 jurisdictions we've testified in front of so far, that citizen perception of them being penalized for going 20 to 30 to 40% over the speed limit in a school zone during the school day when children are there is different than a slight microsecond violation at night through a red light camera. So I think citizens, at least been my experience, perceive this as fairer. So I believe that addresses some of the big brother. Now, as far as license plates, the license plate readers in school zones, we included them as part of our package because in speaking with PTAs, school systems, elected officials, there was great value, we believed, in notifying the police if motorists with a temporary protection order not to be near a school, if a sex offender entered the school zone, et cetera, that would, while I'm very cognizant of privacy concerns and respect all opinions, that unique circumstance trumped the overall fear or concern about your license plate being read.
And I've got a couple more questions, and also I'd like to know what school we're going to start this at. But so, for example, let's just use an example. I'm going down Highway 9, and I hit this school zone for the new school that was built. So, you know, I'm just going down Highway 9, going the speed limit, and I come around the curve, and there's the sign. Now, I do slow down. I obey the laws. However, I don't want to be on Highway 9 and slam my brakes on because I'm afraid somebody's going to give me a ticket. And we had that with the red light cameras. People were slamming the brakes on and getting rear-ended because they knew that camera was on them. So how do you safeguard against that?
So I think there were two questions that I need to answer. Hopefully I addressed the first one about the license plate readers, et cetera. You would ask about your current vendor pulling out when the program was too successful and the revenue wasn't there. We'll certainly contractually commit to staying as long as the city wants us. We will not terminate and are happy to strengthen that clause with your legal team if need be. Not only because it's the right thing to do and sends a terrible message. This is a safety program, not revenue. We're a for-profit company, but safety is our product and that's what we sell. And improving safety results in Alpharetta makes it something for Roswell to consider, and then Sandy Springs, et cetera. So the better we do in the long run. And then as far as the accident concerns, again, I'm very familiar with red light cameras, and traditionally over years, rear end crashes have increased because of people slamming on their brakes in a zone. And typically T-bone crashes went down, and you could argue the merit of that. In automated photo enforcement, there has been no documented increase anywhere of rear end accidents because speeding, people are going a fairly normal traffic flow, and they should slow down even without this camera there. There is a speed zone now for the last 30, 40, 50 years where Roswell's been around, maybe a little less than that, I guess. But the reduction in speed has been there by posted signs already, and I don't believe that's been there.
Where do you measure the speed? So you've got the school zones. Where do you actually measure the speed?
So when we did our test data, what we look at is putting the cameras in about the center of the school zone. So we're not trying to, right at the front edge of the school zone. So as soon as you enter, we try and center them based on where the entrances and exits of the school to make it the most logical for where students would be crossing and that type of information. So it's not going to be like, oh, there's that camera right there. They are kind of centered in the school zone. So as they're coming up, it shouldn't really change their flow pattern from what they have now. As they enter the school zone, you have the school zone flashing lights, and you're going to have some distance there to be able to reduce your speed appropriately before you get to where the photo enforcement is taking place.
And that's a great concern, and it's important to us. We want citizens to feel it's a fair program, or it hurts us as well as our customer. So again, by state law, we must put up signage, but again, with any reasonable limit, as much public education as the city would like, and whatever manner's been successful with your residents in the past. I said social media is fairly prevalent now, PSAs, additional signage. I said for Duluth, we agreed to put additional flashing ambers outside the school zone, which will protect the kids and I think add an additional level of fairness for the motorists too. So with your staff, if we're fortunate to move forward, we'll address any concerns or do our best to.
So I'm interested in the program. I'm most interested in putting it into one school, seeing how it works. The piece I'm troubled with is if we decide it doesn't work, we're in for $10,000. And I guess what would make me more comfortable is to do that test, to look at that one school, come back with the results, but not have a $10,000, some lesser amount. I understand you need to cover some costs, I get that. I don't mind investing a little bit in covering that. Is there an accommodation there that could help us with some of our trepidations?
Yep. Again, obviously you have a fiduciary responsibility to the city and we want to be respectful of that. The 10,000 and all of our competitors and all our countries around the country were a little less, or a little more than that, but we wanted to make it a palatable process. That's about 250 paid tickets, or a little less, 200 and some would be your $10,000. So there probably is little risk to the city, but if that is something that is really important to you, and I can understand it would be, we'll work with your team, and if you want to come to a lesser number for the one test, absolutely. I'll have a boss who won't be as happy with me agreeing to that, but we first of all, we believe it will work. We'll do it. So, yeah, we would want something because there's a lot of expense, but what's a long salesman answer to a good direct question? But yes.
Sure, and I think equally important, I think we'd like to understand what success is before we roll out. I also have similar concerns about what happened with the red light camera project, which seemed like a great idea, and then pretty much everywhere turned out not to be. This seems like a great idea, but let's run the test and find out.
I do believe there are significant differences, but lots of times you hear it's different, and it needs to be proven.
Is there a motion?
Do we know what school we're going to roll this out at?
Currently, we're looking between Crab Apple Middle School or Vickery Mill are the two that we're looking at for a couple reasons. One, if we're actually seeing a 60% reduction, Vickery Mill would give us the most data just because of the amount of cars that travel through that location. Or a Crab Apple, again, I don't want to overload because I don't know what kind of manpower resources. We're estimating approximately 3 violations per minute for an officer to do the review process is what we're currently looking at. So we are taking that into account. And then if we're seeing like the 60% reduction, like what they're seeing in other states, then that would be something we might look at spending some more of our officers' time doing if we're seeing that kind of reduction and we're getting our bang for our buck, so to speak.
And can I ask one other question? What precipitated this? I mean,
So the new House bill came out, and I came into the traffic unit about the same time that the bill came out, and we started researching it. We started doing some research on how it was working in other states, what kind of response they were getting. And obviously, as you can imagine, we get complaints all the time about the speed through our school zones as kids are walking to and from school. And with the limited resources that we have, we're always looking for ways to have force multipliers to be able to influence drivers to voluntarily follow the rules of the road. And if we can do that without us even having to be there and allocate resources to other problem areas, especially during rush hour, which is the same time we have school zones, then that's kind of a win-win for us.
thank you.
I'll motion to move this forward to council meeting with the understanding that they will work with us on the $10,000 price in between now and the council meeting.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Motion to move forward by Councilmember Judy, second by Councilmember Wilsey. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Thanks all. Moving on to the addendum on the agenda, number 11, consideration of a right-of-way abandonment and purchase request on Hightower Road. Mr. Del Ross.
Thank you, Gary. This is a late addition. City staff received a request for right-of-way abandonment along Hightower Road last week, and a survey was provided for you. In the next several slides, I'll try to describe the situation. There were 2 homes built on Hightower Road. You'll see a view from the sidewalk in the picture up on the screen. These homes were recently constructed. One is currently occupied. The second is going to be occupied soon. A fence with brick columns, as you can see on the picture, was constructed not on the land disturbance plans and was accidentally constructed on city right-of-way. In lieu of requiring a reconstruction of this expensive-looking fence, the applicant has asked for right-of-way donation, right-of-way abandonment and purchase from the city of approximately 7 feet per the red lines you see on the graphic. The survey was submitted per the screen. It is approximately 7 feet across the frontage of both properties. The sum square footage is a hair over 2,000 square feet. Working with legal and working with transportation, transportation sees no public use for this 7 feet of right-of-way along the frontage of both homes, because in this situation, the 5-foot sidewalk has already been built, and we don't see a future capital purpose for going beyond the edge of this sidewalk. The existing, let's make sure I get this right. The existing right-of-way line is the outside red line. The right-of-way line would be moved to the inside red line with this purchase of the frontage. Approximately 7 feet wide, approximately 300 feet long across both homes. As far as a value of purchase, I spoke with the legal department recently, and they will be bringing that amount to council if this is approved. We would be asking for a fair market valuation of that square footage.
Floor is open.
Rob, where are the utilities?
Investigate without obviously digging up the ground and verifying exactly what's under there. Staff do due diligence to figure out if there are any utilities in this 7 feet area, and we could not identify any. There are some currently in front of the sidewalk, and there are some currently behind the fence out here, but there is nothing to our knowledge, to the best of our knowledge, in that 7 feet area that would be changing.
I think it's important to add the fact that the builder was asked to buy inspectors to put the fence there to line it up with the other fences on the road. There were inspectors there on a daily basis and watching this be built. And then we discover after it's built that, oops. So I personally feel that part of this is on the city of Roswell.
So that's a fair point. There is a little bit of a he said, she said argument on what was said and what was approved. The property owner's justification for building the fence at this point, and I do not have a clear picture for you. It's off the screen. The northmost boundary of the survey, so basically the property line where the cursor is here, the property owner followed that fence line and continued it along his frontage, not realizing that that fence on the property adjacent to his north was also on city right-of-way, and that's what created the issue moving south through his 2 properties.
Can you go back to the picture real quick? How far away is this red line from the fence? 2 feet?
Approximately 2 feet.
Okay, so if we wanted to, at any point, make that 6 feet wide, that sidewalk, would you be able to there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Motion to approve?
Motion approved by Councilmember Judy,
Second.
second by Mayor Henry. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. Thank you. Thanks, Rob. We're adjourned.